You aren't being a proper woman, therefore you must be a witch. You must be a witch.
Lucille Clifton was a 12-fingered woman, her mother and daughter too, and she stepped into a house in Baltimore and began to hear the voices of her ancestors. We carry our baggage in our cupped hands, she wrote, when we burst through the waters of our mother. She was the first poet to have 2 books up for the Pulitzer Prize at the same time. Her grandmother was a child when she was taken from Africa and forcibly walked across America and never saw her mother again. She was a warrior poet, radical listener. She was from Dahomey women. Lucille Clifton falls into the wide and deep category of witches I have been missing, of poets I wish I'd known earlier, but I'm thankful to be meeting now, finally. Hello. Spirits and storytellers, community weavers and magic makers. I want to bury my bones. All are missing broken bones into the earth of them, and learn whole new ways of being and of listening and of crafting. She wrote, I was born with 12 fingers, like my mother and my daughter, each of us born wearing strange black gloves, extra baby fingers hanging over the sides of our cribs and dipping into the milk. Somebody was afraid we would learn to cast spells, and our wonders were cut off, but they didn't understand the powerful memory of ghosts. Now, we take what we want with invisible fingers, and we connect, my dead mother, my live daughter, and me, through our terrible, shadowy hands. If you listened to my conversation in episode 87 with Dr. Marina Magloire, you heard some about Clifton. Magloire is writing the missing book on Clifton, and she shared a piece of the incredible story in this article for the Paris Review. According to Clifton's firstborn daughter Sydney, over the years, Clifton evolved from the Ouija board to automatic writing, to eventually a spiritual state in which she could directly access the spirits without the need for writing. In the 70s and 80s, the Cliftons' Baltimore home became a spiritual way station through which a wide assortment of spirits apparently passed. Despite her fame as a poet, Clifton's trajectory as a self-described two-headed woman is a little-known part of her legacy. Two-headed woman is a traditional African-American term used to describe women gifted with access to the spirit world as well as to the material world. Two-headed woman is also the name of Clifton's first channeled book of poetry, written at the same time as her unpublished journals of spirit writing or automatic writing, where she received messages which became woven into her worldview and her poems. Dr. Marina Magloire writes, in August and September of 1978, for example, Clifton received a series of dire warnings about the fate of the human world from a mysterious group of spirits she called the Ones. The Ones did not assume the personality of a departed human, and they did not weigh in on day-to-day affairs. They spoke of things of cosmic importance, the deep past of human civilization, and its tenuous future. They returned to remind human beings that they are more than flesh. And in 1978, they warned Clifton, if the world continues on its way without the possibility of God, which is the same as saying without light, love, truth, then what does this mean? It means that perhaps 1,000 years of man's life on this planet will be without light, love, truth. It is what we were saying indeed, that there will be on earth that place which human beings describe to the world of the spirits hell. Now there is yet time, but not very much. Your generation, Lucille, is the beginning of the possibility, and your girl's generation is the middle, etc. And so the generations living their adulthood now upon the earth are perhaps the last of that possibility, to be with light, love, truth. In her book, Generations, Lucille writes, and I could tell you about things we've been through, some awful ones, some wonderful, but I know that the things that make us are more than that. Our lives are more than the days in them. Our lives are our line, and we go on. And she writes, this poem is a table at which we sit and meet even now, though there are miles and months between us. Now look, the children are repeating, "We will wear new bones again." And other people think they know how long life is, how strong life is. We know. Poet Elizabeth Alexander praised Clifton's ability to write physically small poems with enormous and profound inner worlds. And this has been the gift of immersing myself in her writing, as I have been this end of summer season, this season of the middle and last harvest celebrations, of fat red moons and the night we sat and watched the strange silent phenomenon spin the slowest ceiling fan of spiral aurora light over our heads for hours, ions in long stately green, waves like generations. Of the way Lucille hears voices echoing through time, through the bones of houses and of missing fingers, through the silent singing universe washed in a rain of electrons and lightning bugs, to open small doorways into enormous other worlds. As Robert Mitchell in American Book Review writes, her heroes include nameless slaves buried on old plantations, Hector Pieterson, the first child killed in the Soweto riot, Fannie Lou Hamer, founder of the Mississippi Peace and Freedom Party, Nelson and Winnie Mandela, W.E.B. Du Bois, Huey P. Newton, and many other people who gave their lives to free Black people from slavery and prejudice. And in later books, her listening extends even beyond the human world. The embrace of her empathy and her language is vast. Reviewing Clifton's 2008 book, Voices, for the Baltimore Sun, Diane Sharper commented, "Each section explores the ways the poet relates to voices, from those spoken by inanimate objects, to those remembered, to those overheard in the titles of pictures. Serving as a medium, the poet speaks not only for those things that have no voice, but also for the feelings associated with them." She is mighty with her listening. She is a poet medium witch with a gift for words that turn your whole insides over and make you gulp a breath. She writes, "Being property once myself, I have a feeling for it. That's why I can talk about environment." And she writes, "Weird sister, the black witches know that the terror is not in the moon, choreographing the dance of were ladies, and the terror is not in the broom, swinging around to the hum of cat music, nor the wild clock face grinning from the wall. The terror is in the plain pink at the window, and the hedges moral as fire, and the plain face of the white woman watching us as she beats her ordinary bread." She offers the embodied wisdom of fear, that to be different is to be deviant, and the black witch knows this better than others. Don't fear the moon or the dance or the wicked grin, anything uncanny or delicious or deviant. The real terror is the oppressive ordinary, the murderous gaze of white supremacy calculating how and what it will kill in others, in the earth, in itself, to preserve power and to protect its fear. Our power, our fear, mine. I am constantly untangling the nets of my own white privilege, wondering how to look beyond the filters of my own white gaze. It starts with reading for me. Let the invisible fingers in to work their change. In Lucille's poem Hag Riding, the witch message is slightly different. Hag riding, or more often to be hag-ridden, is a term for sleep paralysis. The idea is that you can't move because the witch, evil, overpowering, colonizing, rides you. But Lucille owns the ride. Lucille is the witch, the hag, and the rider. Why is what I ask myself. Maybe it is the African in me still trying to get home after all these years. But when I wake to the heat of morning, galloping down the highway of my life, something hopeful rises in me, rises and runs me out into the road, and I lob my fierce thigh high over the rump of the day, and honey, I ride. She is hope rising. She is a body with a home, an origin, and fierce thighs. She is a witch in the full light of day, and she is pure magic. She wrote, "They ask me to remember, but they want me to remember their memories, and I keep on remembering mine."
Ad break and
ad break, witches.
These ad breaks are sponsored by Missing Witches. We love you if you love us and you want to support us. There are lots of ways that you can do that. One of my personal favorites is our Patreon. There's always something going on the message board there, but specifically we do a monthly chat with those of our patrons who choose to join us. And it has been so rewarding for me, Risa. I think you can say the same thing.
Oh my gosh, yeah. Just come join us. You'll see. You'll just be like, oh, I knew when I started listening to this podcast that I found my witch best friends, and there must be like a badass gang of them out there gathering somewhere in the dark. And you were right. And it's on Patreon. And our Patreon is pay what you can. So it's not like there's a tiered system or whatever. You know, if you can afford $1 a month or whatever else, we will welcome you with open arms. And yeah, our Patreon circles, we just learn from each other, and they're rad, and you should come.
Yeah. And another excellent and exciting and thrilling to even say out loud way that you can support us is by buying our book, Missing Witches.
Oh yeah.
You can get a paper copy if you're like me and you like to fuck a book up when you read it with a lot of
same.
I like to dog ear. I have like a sigil system that I use to annotate my books, but also like a lot of times it just has to be an ebook because I know I'm going to want to search things. You know, sometimes I like an ebook. Also, it's available as an audiobook, which Risa and I narrated ourselves. There are musical versions of the carols. Those are two great ways you can support us through Patreon, through buying our book. You can review our book on your podcast, on your blog, on your social media, on Goodreads, on Amazon. And if you really love this episode, you can tip us at PayPal, paypal.me/missingwitches.
Lucille remembers her own worlds, which includes generations before she was born. In her memoir, Generations, which is read by her daughter, Sydney Clifton, for the audiobook and is utterly wonderful, we hear her remember the voices and stories stretching back, her father remembering what his mother and grandmother would tell him of the times before, and how they would tell it, and the things they would leave out, sitting in silence with the world traumas too big for words. But somehow, in the telling of this layered telling, Lucille finds the words. The inclusion of her unpublished spirit writing into the story of her poetry suggests maybe her work should be included in this weird, emerging, and also ancient genre of channeled writing. And if you're inclined to shrug at the idea of channeled writing, let's maybe pause and consider that, as Arthur Hastings summarizes, about half the world's religious population belong to religions in which channeled revelation and prophecy has been or is a primary aspect of the religion. Much of Western religion would not exist without this form of revelation. Lucille wrote, "Writing is a way of continuing to hope, and that perhaps for me it is a way of remembering I am not alone." And in her poem, Far Memory, she wrote, "The woman walks into my dreams, dragging her old habit. I turn from her shivering to begin another afternoon of rescue. Lucille was braver than me, actively inviting in voices that I have politely but firmly asked to stay away. Child as I am of psychologists and protective of my mental health and my appearance of mental health, but even she turns shivering from the apparitions of her far memory, back to the work of afternoons, of rescuing the people around her in pain with her labor and her joy and her magical language and her house and her sheer bravery. As the litany and incantation of generations tells us over and over again with different implications, she was from Dahomey women. She was of a line of women heroes, rescuing the kids tumbling endlessly, rescuing the house from the brink of chaos, rescuing the stories of generations clamoring at the walls of her gift to be heard and polished and added to the great layers of her work. Dr. Marina McGloire writes, in 1977, Clifton put out an open call to the spirit world for celebrity spirits who would like to take part in an anthology of sorts, which she titled Lives, Visits, Illuminations. By asking the spirits questions like, what was the experience of death like for you? And would you like to clarify anything about your life for our world? Clifton hoped to bring them peace and closure through a discussion of the lessons they had learned since their deaths, and sought to serve spirits and humankind by allowing them to share their experiences in their own words. The resulting replies were a strange, rollicking, and deeply moving compilation of voices, often speaking against racism and the human tendency to hierarchize physical differences. In her writing, Clifton adopts an ethereal stance in which the soul survives bodily death, has survived numerous bodily deaths, will survive more. There is someone in each of us greater than the personality we manifest in any life. The soul does not merely select her own society, the soul is her own society. And love is eternal, is God, is. In her view, it is no accident that her body and its specificities became a channel for the spirits. In her writing, being a Black woman is a way of listening, a radical form of receptiveness to the lessons that history teaches. And as her daughter Sydney puts it, I think her actual gift was her openness and ability to hear. Clifton's theory of spirit does not succumb to fatalism. A radical way of listening and receptiveness creates a theory of spirit that does not succumb, not to fatalism, not to despair, not to the sickening crush of systemic inequality. She throws her fierce thigh over the rump of day and rides, and I hear her cast it like a spell for you, to find new radical ways of listening, and so of feeling the impulse of joy and a heart for rescue. Lucille's mediumship began with playing with a Ouija board in that house in Baltimore, and having a spirit spell out her mother's name and make itself clear with an accumulation of selfness that it was her, Thelma, who had died at 44 and left her daughter alone in a way that you can be in a house with your father and your sisters all born from other mothers. Marina writes, when one considers the trials Clifton's mother Thelma faced, poverty, epilepsy, a philandering husband, death at 44 years old, there is some comfort in this expansive view of the soul. Thelma's spectral return represents a Black woman's soul unbound by the structural misfortunes of her life. She bears witness to these trials but is not erased by them. Lucille Clifton's spirit writing makes the pangs of my own embodiment as a Black woman easier to bear amid constant reminders of the perils of Black embodiment. There is solace in the idea that this brown skin and these wide hips were made for listening to the voices that could not be erased by time, history, or death. O my body, make of me always a woman who listens. Okay, I quote Marina a lot here. I think she's an utterly magical writer, and I can't wait for her book on Clifton and whatever books come after that. Marina and Lucille sanctify their own bodies when they reveal or revel in the idea that this body in particular, in the way it has been pressure treated by the world, and in its own electrical currents and specific shapes and resonances, is made for listening to missing voices. What an uplifting, world-opening gift of an idea. The body is a site of magic, not just in orgasm or blood rites or the ways white male storytellers or state-sanctioned alchemists have explored, drinking silver to reach for an eternity of their own same privilege, but in a way that generational trauma and ranks of murdered and missing ancestors grow loud in their ears, tuning beloved bodies of the next generation into new ways of hearing that light, love, truth is. What haunts me and challenges me and confronts me in this beautiful idea Marina finds in Lucille, the idea that this brown skin and these wide hips were made for listening to the voices that could not be erased by time, history, or death, is the flip side, of course, that something in my own white skin, settler skin, brown with an Iroquois lineage lost generations ago, whited out, that something in me knows of a cellular architecture of not listening, of willfully welding blinders onto the stacks of inequality that my ancestors' bodies crawled over, clawing out a life. The ways that we have learned to tune out the world, the people, the animals, the howling winds of rage, the bodies broken on the trail of tears and the bodies melted in middle passage, which Lucille tells us are married to rock and ocean now. I have to just sit with this, I guess, and keep thinking and writing through it. Keep reading the poets like Clifton who channeled the voices of the world and can open and tune me and maybe pass the language on as I turn it over in my hands. Maybe this is a piece of long listening magic, word magic, and how it moves through our bodies. I know from talking with other white women that instinct to white tears for the whole fucking injustice of it all, but self-pity also, when confronted by history or inequality or injustice, is common among us. The concept of white guilt and white tears feels pretty accurate, even among people for whom it's not conscious or intentional escape or manipulation, not willfully trying to get out of being called on or called in, not even particularly conscious of our desire to evade the guilt and shame of this snide privilege, but it's all there still. In some real way, my body doesn't want to hear. It wants to weep. When I spoke with Marina about the idea of a body made for listening, I related it to my sense that chronic pain changed how I heard the world. Later, I wrote to her to apologize. I didn't mean to compare the world of experience of Black women and what Marina and Lucille have noticed about the radical form of listening that might offer to my aching bones and brain. In doing so, to equate Black and white experience and to erase the hope and power of a redemptive magic. Marina said she didn't hear it that way, but she appreciated the apology. This is a starting point for me, and I offer it to you, white people staunch in our belief in our good intentions. Try to play our own tapes back. Where I notice shame, see where I can do this simple thing and be honest and apologize. Let shame make care a real action. Listen to the layers around our own words and assumptions for the ways we too might be distorted by privilege, and then make reparations. Open up some space. I circle back to Sydney Clifton's perception that her mother's gift was an openness and ability to listen, and I think about how profound an insight that was about that time. Lucille worked from the dinner table, drawing down her perfect worlds of insight in the midst of the movement and sounds of kids, and all the artists and activists and family and community who moved through that home, and made an emergent energy electric there, a tightly wound band of feelings and movement and hope and sound, enough to make a kind of magnet for more of what was missing to be listened to. An emergent belief in worth and magic and power. A belief that was, in and of itself, magic in what it could birth. Magloire identifies that same emergent impulse in the Harlem Renaissance, surfacing again in the internet embrace of #BlackGirlMagic and all that swirls around it. She writes in this other piece for the LA Review of Books this time in the blog. Woven into the music, literature, and artwork of the time period was this message. We are not the illness. We are the antidote. And in those brief years between the two world wars, it would seem that America knew it. White America's brief interest in, quote, the Negro, is nothing more than an affirmation that Black people have a secret escape route from the woes of modernity. And though Black Americans are just as prone to alienation and emptiness as any other variety of American, to believe that the cure is in us is an immensely powerful thing for a people who had so long been labeled as a problem. What a perfect summary of how a philosophy of Black magic, and I think of a craft deeply rooted in anti-racist, anti-capitalist, feminist philosophy, differs from traditional religions. The deviant, the occulted, the oppressed come to know we are not the illness. We are the antidote. To believe that the cure is in us is a power. Marina continues, James Baldwin, a Harmelite of the generation following the Renaissance, affirms the unique spiritual achievement of Black Americans as a kind of sensuality, meaning an ability to respect and rejoice in the force of life itself and to be present in all that one does, from the effort of loving to the breaking of bread. In this way, the Harlem Renaissance is an articulation of a deepening of Black sensuality, an orientation towards the world to which we are greatly indebted today. Lucille Clifton sings of this sensuality, rejoicing in the force of life, being oriented towards the world. Two of her most quoted poems from the collection she titled Two-Headed Woman in honor of her radical forms of listening are called Ode to My Hips and Ode to My Hair. Marina again. Two-Headed Woman is her first published work to narrate her spirit communication. It begins, however, not with the story of Clifton's spirit visitations, but with a series of oft-quoted homages to various aspects of her body, homage to my hips and homage to my hair and what the mirror said. The latter poem ends with the exhortation, listen, woman, you not a no-place, anonymous girl, Mister with his hands on you, he got his hands on some damn body. The body is not a no place. It is a some place, a location in the here and now, moving in loops and circuits through time with its own particular spins and energies and electricities and loves and hopes and power. It's not anonymous. You are some damn body, and the damn has both the ring of how real people talk and also the defiance of the damned, the oppressed. If the powers that steal and own bodies and violate bodies declare that they are holy, then I throw my lot in with the other side every damn time. With her radical listening, Lucille tells us about the power in her body, power even in the ways it ages and makes vulnerable. She wishes for us to know of each other's bodies and what those bodies have known. In Wishes for Sons, she writes, I wish them cramps. I wish them a strange town and the last tampon. I wish them no 7-Eleven. I wish them 1 week early and wearing a white skirt. I wish them 1 week late. Her poems are portals into each other's bodies, other worlds, and at the same time they laugh past the ways we can fetishize the Black woman's body as well as her magic, and the ways we can use that fetishization to again stop listening, to miss out on the individuality. In a piece called What If Black Women Were Free, Marina exhorts us to resist the urge to represent Black women as a monolithic group. Indeed, within the category of Black, they include a complex multitude, from slave-holding Senegambian hostesses to conservative Christian politicians, color-conscious Creole landowners to Germans of Asian and Arab descent, all within the category of Black. When taken together, all these examples form a genealogy of the fracturing choices and elusive freedoms that Black women have forged for themselves since the beginning of the transatlantic slave trade. Fracturing and forging, some common roots and pressures, but utterly unique. People, ripe with all the magic we have in our own roots and bones, shadows in cells, carbon mirror breathing with the plant worlds around us, crawling with life, breathing through each other long after we're gone in the spells we leave of our words and actions. Some tuned to a radical way of listening by the way they are shaped and the things they have seen in their generations. As Araceli Gourmet writes of Lucille in her foreword to Generations, no one writes like Lucille Clifton, and yet, if it were possible to open a voice, like a suitcase, to see what it carries inside it, I believe that inside the voices of many of our most beloved contemporary writers are the poems of Lucille Clifton. There is the ferocity of her clear sight, fiercely freed from shame, and shuttled into truth-telling and experience. There is also the constellatory thinking, where everything is kin. Note that she doesn't say that everyone is kin, but that everything is. And I think Lucille's life gives us a genealogy of understanding generations of humans and the things we call things. Because I think the Clifton house in Baltimore was Clifton kin. Marina writes, the house on Talbot Road was sacred. In the arms of its wraparound porch, poet Lucille Clifton lived and loved and danced, along with her husband, Fred Clifton, and their 6 children, for more than a decade. It was at the dining room of this house that Lucille wrote some of her most celebrated collections of poetry. It was a place where their people could, in the words of Lucille's poem After Kent State, come into the black and live. In our interview, Marina also told me that Lucille's spirit writing began and ended in that house. A house carries with it something, an assembled energy. Doreen Valiente, in her final public address, urged us to consider what kind of energy it is that witches draw upon when they call down the cone of power. And I think about that all the time. I think about it in relation to the energy in houses, in the patterns of passage, in the way the places I have lived have been part of my body. The apartment crawling with cockroaches where my mom and I lived when I was little, sitting watching the blue and yellow budgies hop and poop around the tiny living room while the Free to Be record wore out its grooves with my replaying. The light from the mini mall across the street. The apartment in my 20s where the tub burped black kitchen goop. The 2 times I finally lived alone and made a living. The quiet of the sunny breeze down the long hallways. The way those brief months of solitary reprieve still give me breathing room today. Those places are more than tattooed in me. And I left my mark in them, walking up and down the halls. And when we were together, there was a particular alchemy of what was impossible being born. When it was over, I like to think we both mourned. Marina continues, the Cliftons' loss of their home to foreclosure in 1980 was a traumatic event. According to the children, while the Cliftons were still inside, neighbors gathered outside to place bids on the house. Many years later, Lucille said, I don't think my family ever got over the loss of our home. This has been the fate of many Black families in America who have lost their homes to eviction, foreclosure, and the structural violence of redlining and gentrification, to experience the loss of their spaces without adequate time to mourn. When Sydney bought back the house in 2019, it brought a sense of wholeness to the surviving Clifton siblings, fulfilling the prophetic lines of their mother's 1969 poem Admonitions, What you pawn, I will redeem. In that poem, she's telling her sons that this is what she can offer. What they pawn, she will redeem. She will be a net, a layer of gentleness in a world that has not been gentle, but has been cuttingly unjust. She will be forgiveness. And that's the story of the generations that swell and sing a chorus alongside her poetry, and in the house that Sydney Clifton redeemed. The one she fills again with artists and energies and activists and love, weaving something that will hold when all else is breaking. And if they listen, one melody tracked through the kitchen, up the stairs, all along the porch, will be Lucille's. singing for her people, her generations, to take what you want with invisible fingers, to redeem what has been lost or pawned, to become the storytellers and the artists and directors, magic in your own right, no permission required. Witches, you are some damn body. Lucille and all her generations of Dahomey women are here, an army of memories and strength standing with all your ancestors in the in-between. That power, that light that never goes out, calling out with the extreme urgency of this time that our lives are more than the days in them. And it's not quite too late to hear the pressing call of the earth, and finally to know it in our bones, both living and missing, that love is, that we are kin to everything.
You must be a witch.